Good morning, YouTube. Welcome back to another review. Today we're going to be riding the FXDR 114, the brand new bike in the 2019 model, thanks to Alamo City Harley-Davidson here in the gorgeous San Antonio, Texas. Before I get too deep into the review here, if you do like these types of videos, test rides, things like that, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I put out 3 videos a week every single week. I will be riding most of the 2019 models, and I've done a lot of the 2018 models already. But let's go ahead and get to the bike. First off, as it sits right now in vivid black, the price tag is $21,349. If you want any of the colors, that's going to jump up to $21,749. This bike, of course, is powered by the Milwaukee 8 114, featuring this new air cleaner here. It is putting out 119 foot-pounds of torque, 2-in-1 exhaust, got the 120 tire in the front, and then the big 240 tire in the rear. It has a 4.4 gallon tank, 46 miles per gallon, making the range per tank around just over 200 miles. The bike does feature forward controls as well as an oil cooler up front. Up on the handlebars you have clip-ons with your FXDR, digital speed gauge, as well as lit up LED indicators down here. You do get the LED daymaker standard as well as LED turn signals in the front and the rear. I'm very excited for this bike as something completely new that Harley hasn't done, so let's go ahead and just hop on the bike and see what she does. So starting up, the bike is still very smooth, very minimal shake in the mirrors here. Feet position is weird. They are out there, even further out there than they are on the Fat Bob. So before we get going here, in case this is the first video you've ever seen on this channel, let me take a second to introduce myself. My name is Justin, and I run this channel here on YouTube called Bike and Bird. I've ridden and owned everything from dirt bikes, 1000cc sport bikes, Harleys, you name it. I currently ride a 2017 Harley-Davidson Dyna Street Bob. My bike before that was 2014 Sportster. I'd also like to point out that even though this video is being produced in partnership with Alamo City Harley-Davidson, it is in my contract that I'm able to give my honest review, whether that review be good, bad, or indifferent. So, without any further ado, let's get this bike on the road. Okay, 65 miles an hour, just like that. This bike is quick. So I do want to let you guys know we will be jumping on the interstate here in a second. This is just to test out the interstate capabilities. We won't be doing the entire review on the interstate, so I'm going to have to talk a little bit louder. It's going to get a little bit windy, but don't worry, that's not going to be the entire review. We're going to take this bike on some back roads, through some neighborhoods, through some urban environments to really put it through the test in multiple situations. Oh my gosh, this bike just pulls you through the corners. Woo! No problem getting up to highway speeds. My God, no problem at all. Alright, so one thing I always focus on the highway is wind. Now, of course, with this being a bike with no real fairing and no real windshield, you wouldn't really expect it to be, you know, comfortable touring style, but honestly, out of the Softails, I'm experiencing the least amount of wind. Now, of course, that's with exception of the Heritage because it's got the full windshield, but all of the bikes that do not have a fairing or windshield, I'm experiencing the least amount of wind on this bike. I don't know if that has to do with this tiny little, yeah, this fairing is pushing the wind up. It's pushing out to about right here. That's crazy. Granted, I still am getting some wind on my chest, body, and I'm definitely getting a lot of wind on my legs, but it's definitely not beating me up. Very far from it, actually. As far as smoothness, this bike feels planted. I feel very little vibration in my arms, very little vibration in my legs, and the wind just feels smooth. The wind that is hitting me feels smooth. 6th gear, you still have plenty of torque to do any sort of passing that you might need to do. Alright, so coming down off of the interstate here, this bike just has a certain cool factor to it that I'm having a hard time putting words to. And let me paraphrase all of this by saying that I was not expecting to like this bike. I was not one of the ones that was super hyped about it, super impressed, very excited about it. Granted, I was excited to ride it because it's something different, it's something new, but I'm definitely not a fanboy of it by any means. But man, after just that little spout on the highway, it's got something. I can't... Hopefully by the end of this video, I'll have a way to describe it. So the power of this 114 is just so smooth. I don't know if they tuned this one differently than the ones that they've tuned in the different bikes, but this bike just has a certain smoothness to it. Also, the handling on it is pretty ridiculous. You've got the most lean angle out of any of the Softail models, even greater than that of the Fat Bob. Low speed handling is very nice. ABS brakes, of course, coming standard on this bike, a feature that I greatly enjoy. Looking down at the gauge here, we are getting quite a bit of reflection on it. That's a pretty common thing on these Harley gauges. Just run through the menu real quick. We've got the range, clock, RPM, odometer, trip A, trip B, and that's it. You have your gear indicator on the right, speed in the middle, and your fuel on the left side. Oh, road closed. Damn it. Alright, well, plan B. And the power of this bike is raw. It's so raw. Man, even with that 240 rear tire, man, this thing just hugs those corners. That was one thing I was really worried about on this bike, is with a 240 rear. Every other bike I've ridden with a 240 rear tire, I absolutely hate it. Feels like you're constantly fighting the bike to turn. This, definitely not the case. So I want to take a second to point out comfort. Now, Harley is not known for making comfortable seats. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way. But this seat is actually really nice. It's not as comfortable as the touring seats, but it's pretty damn close. It hugs your booty in just a certain different way. It's not like any of the other Softail seats I've sat on. It's got a nice lip on the back to kind of lock you in. Ergonomics were a big factor on this bike too. Now I will say that first off, just to kind of get out of the way, I'm 6'2", 225. I've got 34-inch inseam, or 32-inch inseam, I'm sorry. My legs feel out there. It feels a little bit out of place, to be honest. I'm also extremely bent over to reach the handlebars. Now, I'm not a sport bike bent over, but it's kind of close to like sport touring, because the clip-ons do have a little bit of rise to them, and I'm sure that you can swap that out. But from the factory, I do have a little bit more pressure on my wrist than I would like to have. And I could see after about 60 or 70 miles, this bike would get a little uncomfortable just because you're so far hunched over. But with that hunch, you get a different riding experience than I've experienced on any other Harley. And that's that you're so hunched over and you're looking so far up that you almost don't see the bike. I know the camera's probably going to make it look a little bit different, but from my perspective right now, I'm able to see about right here, this, and that's it. Everything else is covered by my helmet. Now, of course, I am wearing a full face helmet, and that's going to change depending on what you're wearing. But with a full face helmet, that's all I see. So I almost feel like I'm leaning off over the bike, which is different, but it's not a bad thing. Oh my God, this bike just wants to just dive into these turns. Now, granted, we're not hitting anything too crazy or too out there, but you can tell this bike can handle. Oh yes, that is pretty amazing with that 240 rear. So this bike in running order is just under 670 pounds, and I would say it feels about 600 to 625. It definitely does not feel Sportster weight, but it's definitely more nimble than some of the other Softails, and definitely more nimble than all of the touring bikes I've ridden. Nimbleness side to side. The side-to-side flicking, just kind of doing this thing right here, you can definitely feel the 240 fighting you a little bit, as opposed to like a 180 or a 150. Definitely having to put a lot more effort into the bars to get it to do this. 2-in-1 exhaust is something that a lot of people did not like. They said it's too big, it's too ugly. I give companies a little bit of leniency on exhaust because there's so many regulations and stuff that they're having to abide by, that I can't discount them for that, because they're just dealing with what they are given. I will say though, with it being a stock exhaust, it's got some grunt to it. This thing hits 60 like it's nothing. Let's take a second to talk about this air cleaner right here. Now, I would be interested to see the performance enhancement that this provides, because it is pretty bulky. I do feel it on the inside of my legs. Definitely not the most ideal feeling, but I kind of like the way it looks. It was inspired over the NHRA drag bikes, and I can see where they get that from. Well, I'd like to know, what are the pros to that, and is there a better alternative to that look? Because I'm sure a lot of people aren't a big fan of it. So let me take a second to talk about size of this bike. I cannot remember the exact seat height off the top of my head. I'll go ahead and place it here on the screen. But if you take a look here while I'm at this stop sign, I'm flat-footing it for sure, but I'm definitely not as low as I have been on some other bikes. Man, that foot position is just so weird. I feel like the feeding position is it's a little too far forward. I think bringing it in, not even like 2 or 3 inches, would have been a pretty big improvement in my opinion. I'm sure once you get used to it, it's not as bad, but right off the bat, it just feels unnatural. I'm trying to kind of put my feet in a position, and this bike could almost get away with rear sets. Definitely mid controls it could get away with. But I'm curious how that affects the lean angle and all that kind of stuff. Also, I'm not getting a lot of heat off of this motor. I mean, I definitely feel it, and the 114s do run a little bit hotter than the 107s, but still, even with the bigger motor, still a vast improvement over the old 103s. So let's move on to another segment that I like to do on my reviews. That's the top 3 things that I would do to this bike. Now, this is not 3 things this bike needs. This is, if I bought this bike today, what would be the first 3 things on my list? Now, as always, this makes it on the list almost every single time. I would have to do bars. Now, with me being a bigger guy, I would like the bars to be right about here. A little bit straighter, a little bit more upright. I really think, actually, now that I'm looking at that, man, that'd be pretty sweet. I don't know how it would work with these clip-ons, if you have to get some sort of adapter or just do straight bolt-ons or what you'd have to do, but some T-bars would be really nice on this bike. After that, I'd probably do a 2-in-1 exhaust. I know it already has a 2-in-1, but I would just do something aftermarket, make it a little bit louder, a little bit more performance out of it. And then last but not least, I would get rid of that rear hugger on the back. A lot of people are complaining about that. For most states, I don't know if it's for all states, and I believe most countries, you have to have something covering the rear tire from the factory. It's a law, it's a requirement for them. So I'm 90% sure that's why Harley did that. I did look it over before I got on the bike though, and aside from wiring, it is 3 bolts and 2 screws. So literally less than 15 minutes and you could have that thing off. Now, of course, you have to have some way to rerun the wiring up underneath the tail, but I think once you did that, it would look really cool. Now the next segment I like to do is this a good beginner's bike slash who is this bike for? Now I don't like answering the beginner bike question because I feel like there's way too many factors that go into that, so I will answer the who is this bike for. This is a hard one to do, guys. This really is. I definitely do not believe that this is for someone who wants to crush miles. I don't believe that this bike would be very comfortable, especially stock from the factory, over 150 miles. I think with the aggressive riding position, just wouldn't be the most ideal setup for that. I would say this bike would be for anyone who's looking at a Fat Bob that wants to spend an extra $3,000. Other than looks, now I will say that they look very different. The Fat Bob and this bike are pretty close. Now this bike does have a more aggressive stance to it than the Fat Bob, which is saying a lot because the Fat Bob definitely is aggressive, and they weigh in at pretty much the same. This bike does have more lean angle, so I don't know, on paper they're pretty close, but with this bike being $3,000 more, I don't know. I want to say they were around 18, but I can't remember if that was for the 107 or 114. But anyways, depending on the price tag, the Fat Bob and this bike are pretty close. I would recommend it for maybe even a person that's never had a Harley before, maybe someone coming from sport bikes, coming over to touring. This definitely would be a more comfortable bike than a sport bike, but definitely not the most comfortable bike out of the Softail line. Definitely someone who rides aggressively and has the skills to ride aggressively. I definitely feel like someone could get themselves in trouble on this bike, but overall still a very fun bike, a very pleasant bike. I'm an aggressive rider normally. I tone it back quite a bit on these test rides because, you know, they're brand new bikes and I can't afford to pay for them if I mess them up. But I could definitely see myself owning this bike. Now, is it worth the $22,000? Honestly, I don't believe so. I believe this bike should be around the 18.7 to 19.4 range. I feel like having this bike's price start with a 2 is really going to hurt the sales of this bike. I still believe that there are going to be people that are going to be willing to pay that much money for this bike once they sit down and get some seat time on it. Alright guys, let's head on back to the dealership where I'll give you my final thoughts and wrap up this review. Alright guys, so my final thought of the FXDR. This bike just has a certain cool factor to it. There are some things I didn't like. I feel like the controls are a little bit too far forward, and that's even me being a taller guy. Front suspension was great, rear suspension was great. That 240 tire does not inhibit the handling at all. This bike handles really nice. Power is great. Power is right there where you need it. The power band is awesome. Very smooth. Decently comfortable riding. Definitely not as comfortable as some of the other Softails, but for such an aggressive stance, not bad at all. Well guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. If you found this video informative or helpful in any way, please hit that like button. It does do a ton for the channel. If you haven't already, go ahead and punch that subscribe button. Like I said, 3 videos a week, every single week. Other than that, I want to thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time.